As we discuss topics such as territorial authority and tearing down strongholds, we should know just who we're going up against. When it comes to fallen rebellious angels, we often think of two specific groups: the sons of God of the divine council and the watchers of Genesis 6. I wanted to dig a little deeper into each one, at least from my perspective, and relate it ultimately to our commission of removing the strongholds over the countries of our world. It's important to know who we are dealing with. In the ancient biblical worldview, not all rebellious spiritual beings share the same fate. Some still roam the earth and influence nations today. Some operate in the heavenly realms over kingdoms and governments. And some are already imprisoned in darkness, awaiting final judgment. Well, most likely, at least. Biblically speaking, not every fallen spiritual being is the same. To really understand what Scripture is describing, we have to separate these beings into categories. There are many, but I'm going to deal with just these two: the sons of God and the watchers. First, let's talk about the watchers. Generally speaking, watcher angels are those who typically have a close domain and proximity to the throne room. As far as I can tell, they can be cherubim, seraphim, or ophanim angels. A watcher is a job description, and they have an important job, keeping sin and evil far from Yahweh. On a side note, why would there need to be a watcher in heaven in the first place, around the throne room, guarding Yahweh? It's the age-old question of how sin entered Lucifer's heart in the first place in a perfect place like heaven. I have my thoughts on that, but all I'll say right now is angels have free will just like mankind does, and we can't equate heaven or any physical location with God. Heaven is not perfect, God is perfect. Heaven is a place. It's not even an eternal place. It had a beginning, and someday it will have an end, or at the very least will be changed and renewed. Like in Revelation 21:1, where it says, "Then I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and first earth had passed away." Why would it need to be changed or renewed if it were perfect and eternal? Okay, now back to the watchers. The group of angels, which we read about in Genesis 6 and in the book of Enoch, are watchers. These are the 200 angels who descended upon Mount Hermon and cohabited with human women, producing the Nephilim giants. Why they came down to earth, I'm not sure we know. But Jude says, referring to these watchers, the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. It sounds like they went AWOL and left their post when they shouldn't have. It's possible Lucifer sent them on a mission. Unlike other rebellious spiritual beings, the watchers committed a specific transgression, a sin which was forbidden by God, crossing the line between species. The whole reason for their transgression was to create offspring that had a stake in the dominion of earth. Dominion was given to man, and their half-man offspring would have legal right to rule over the earth. These creatures would report directly to the fallen watchers who created them, and they would report to Lucifer, creating a chain of command hierarchy. Ultimately, Lucifer would have dominion over the earth, and since Lucifer himself didn't commit the crime, he wasn't directly punished for it, which was obviously intentional. So these watchers abandoned their proper domain and committed a forbidden sin which they knew was wrong. They spent time debating amongst themselves if they should go through with it or not, and they made a pact or a covenant that if they do this, they were all doing it, and they would all be held equally responsible. And so they did. They married human women and created hybrid beings, half angel and half human. You can read more about this in Enoch chapter 6. Because of their transgression, Scripture says they were imprisoned. 2 Peter 2:4 says, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment." The word translated as hell here is the Greek word Tartarus, a place of deep confinement and darkness. And in Jude verse 6, it echoes the same idea. The angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So it appears these watchers are currently imprisoned in the abyss, a gloomy place of confinement awaiting final judgment. I don't see anywhere that these angels were released. In Revelation 20, verse 3, it says Satan was thrown into the pit for 1,000 years. This is probably the same pit or abyss where the watchers are. And then later in verse 7, it says, And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations. It doesn't mention anything about the watcher angels also being released. And since they were supposed to be in there until the day of judgment, I assume they are still there to this day. However, one side note I would like to mention, and I'm going to choose my words carefully here lest I get myself into algorithm jail or get shut down altogether for speaking too much truth. I believe the particle experiments that they've been doing for years over in Europe is to open a portal to that pit and let those fallen angels out. They've literally said they were trying to open a door into another dimension to see what would come out from the other side. They may have already done it. Remember that eclipse that happened back in April 8th, 2024, and all the odd circumstances surrounding it? A lot of Christians thought it was going to be the rapture, but I think they tried to open the abyss. They did do some major experiments that very day. I don't think they were successful because God said these watchers would be locked up until Judgment Day. But the fact that they're trying to release them tells you a lot about who's really in control. And again, I think it's important for us who have true dominion of this earth to not just sit back and let stuff like this happen. We have a responsibility to steward this world we live in and put an end to such nefarious activities. We can simply pray for things like equipment failure or the removal of Satan's henchmen in positions of power. We can stop these things from happening. So the second category of angels is what many call the divine council rulers or the sons of God. They are high-ranking angels given delegated authority within the heavenly administration of creation. They hold a high position, appointed by God, in the courts of heaven. In the ancient Hebrew worldview, these beings are not equal to God. They are subordinate entities who serve under the authority of the Most High, within God's heavenly council. According to Michael Heiser, it wasn't that God needed a council to help him make decisions, but he chose to include them in the process, much like he does with us even today. An example from 1 Kings 22 is one of the clearest biblical pictures of the divine council in session. In this passage, the prophet Micaiah describes a heavenly courtroom scene in which Yahweh is seated on his throne while spiritual beings stand around him and participate in deliberation. Here is this key section from 1 Kings 22, 19 through 22. And it says, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing by, on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will persuade Ahab to go up that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead? So one spoke in this manner, and another spoke in that manner. Then a spirit came forth and stood before the Lord, and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said to him, in what way? So he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And the Lord said, you shall persuade him, and also prevail. Go out and do so. This scene is extremely important because it reveals several characteristics of the divine council worldview. First, God is depicted as the absolute king, seated on the throne. He is not among equals, he is supreme ruler over the heavenly assembly. Second, there exists a host of heaven surrounding him. This refers to angelic beings serving in God's heavenly court. And thirdly, these beings participate in heavenly administration. God asks the council how Ahab should be judged, and various spirits respond with proposals until one spirit volunteers to become a lying spirit in the mouth of Ahab's prophets. This does not mean God is uncertain how to handle the problem. Rather, the passage portrays God governing through a heavenly administration, allowing these angels to participate in carrying out his decrees. According to Deuteronomy 32, after the Tower of Babel incident, God divided the nations among the sons of God. One side note is that some translations say children of Israel instead of sons of God. But Israel didn't even exist yet at that time, so it's a poor translation. And a recent Dead Sea Scroll discovery uses the term sons of God, and the ESV adopted that in their translation. These angelic rulers were assigned authority by God over territories and peoples. The people of these nations rejected God, and God essentially divorced them and gave them to other gods. Now, whether these other gods had already fallen at that time or not isn't clear. But either way, at some point, they did rebel and mishandled their job. Psalm 82 gives a dramatic picture of God confronting these beings, many of whom we have to assume rebelled. God says, "You are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but you shall die like men." One question we must ask is, did every divine ruler rebel? It isn't clear if every one of the sons of God rebelled, or if it was just a few, or for that matter, if any more rebelled since that time, thousands of years ago. We automatically think of the lower G gods as fallen, but they weren't originally fallen while serving as gods on the council of the Most High. One example of a god who did not rebel would be Michael. The book of Enoch lists Michael among the archangels assigned positions of authority, and Daniel describes Michael as the great prince who stands watch over Israel. Michael appears to remain faithful, which suggests there may still be loyal heavenly rulers serving under God's authority even now. Surely, after this great rebellion, God would have appointed others into that position. I doubt he did away with his council just because some of them went rogue. But again, we don't really know for sure. But this is what we're up against today. Unlike the Watchers, these beings are still active. Daniel 10 speaks of these gods, calling them names like Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece. They are spiritual powers influencing earthly empires from the heavenly realms. They still operate over nations. They still influence governments, cultures, ideologies, and systems of power. And according to Psalm 82, their final judgment has been declared, but not yet fully executed. This is why I say we need godly men and women to step up into positions of authority over the nations. This is our home, and we need to enter our promised land and drive out the kingdoms of darkness.